I'm not telling this story to get sympathy. I'm telling it because I still can't understand how someone can erase a person so cleanly, so deliberately, after using him to build everything. 3 weeks ago, I stood inside a freezing server room with my hands shaking, not from nerves, but from exhaustion, and thought, if this works, our company finally has a future. I didn't know then that by the time the launch happened, they would pretend I never existed. My name isn't important, but my role was. I was the guy who built the entire foundation of our 100K micro data center, from choosing the racks and PDUs, to negotiating co-location space, to literally swiping my own credit card to cover deposits we temporarily didn't have cash flow for. In a small startup, titles mean nothing. Responsibilities mean everything, and I carried all of them. When our CEO first pitched the vision, a hybrid compute node that proves we can handle enterprise clients, I believed him. I'd worked enough corporate jobs to know this could be my chance to finally step out of being someone else's engineer and become a technical co-founder, not just a hired pair of hands. He promised equity, partnership, and a future. We're building this together, he said, so I acted like it. I spent months negotiating with vendors who normally wouldn't even speak to a startup our size. I begged for extended payment terms, explained our growth plan, showed them usage graphs, convinced them that we were a good risk. Some believed me, some didn't. For the ones who didn't, I covered the difference. Hardware deposits, my card, licensing renewals, my emergency savings, travel to inspect the facility, my points. I documented every expense, every purchase order, every email, not because I expected a fight, but because engineers document everything. It's our nature. And honestly, I thought I was protecting the company, not myself. Meanwhile, our CEO thrived in the spotlight. He loved investor calls, pitch decks, and metaphors about disruption. He was charming, the kind of charming that could make you forget he had missed 3 payrolls and shrugged it off with, "We'll catch up when funding lands." He trusted me blindly with the technical side. I trusted him blindly with the business side. It felt like a fair trade at the time. By mid-December, the physical skeleton of the data center was finally real. 2 custom racks, dual A plus B power, redundant uplinks, fiber splice trays, battery backup, cold aisle containment the facility helped us set up, server clusters I'd configured over too many sleepless nights. Every cable laid by my hands, every system tested until the LEDs stopped mocking me. The Monday before Christmas, our CEO walked into the server room, wearing a smile so wide it looked rehearsed. "Investors are coming for the official launch next month," he said. "This is going to be huge." I remember nodding, exhausted but proud. My back hurt, my eyes were red, but seeing the project finally stand on its own legs, it made everything worth it. I joked, "Just spell my name right on the slides." He laughed. I thought it was a good laugh. Looking back, it was the laugh of someone who already knew he wouldn't. A week later, I got the first hint. Not a red flag, more like the echo of one. Our project manager forwarded me a calendar invite for a data center launch strategy session. I scanned the list of attendees: marketing, CEO, business development, a couple of advisors, no engineers, including me. I asked the PM if it was a mistake. She hesitated, only for a second, but long enough. "It's, mostly a business-facing meeting," she said. "They said they didn't need deep tech input today." Deep tech input? I'd negotiated the entire topology, the cooling requirements, the reserved power draw, the licensing structure. If anyone needed deep tech input, it was every person in that room. Still, I tried to stay rational. Maybe it was truly just a prep meeting. Maybe they were saving technical details for a separate call. I'd been tired, emotional. Maybe I was imagining things. Then 2 days later, I saw something that made my stomach drop. One of our junior designers stopped by my desk. "Hey," he said, "am I supposed to include your name on the architecture slide or keep it as is?" "What do you mean, as is?" I asked. He opened the deck. There it was. My diagrams, my designs, my exact notes. Phrased the way I phrase things, even the typo I kept forgetting to fix. All under one bold title. Architecture designed by CEO's name. My name didn't appear anywhere. Not on the slide, not in the appendix, not in the team section. I stared at the screen for a long moment, long enough that the designer shifted uncomfortably. Maybe he just wants it simplified, he offered quietly. Maybe, I said, although something inside me started to crack. Because this wasn't simplification, this was omission, a clean one. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. People make mistakes. Slides get edited thoughtlessly. I tried to be the reasonable one, the adult, the partner he claimed I was. But that night, lying awake, a thought kept crawling back. Why does it feel like he's preparing a version of the story where I was never part of it? At the time, I didn't know the answer. I didn't know that this was just the first layer. I didn't know how much deeper it would go. And I definitely didn't know that by the day of the launch, I wouldn't just be missing from a slide. I'd be erased completely. I wish I could say the slide thing was the worst of it. It wasn't. It was just the moment I started paying attention, really paying attention, to how neatly I was being pushed out of the frame. A few days after I saw the deck, our CEO called an all-hands alignment meeting. It was the kind of meeting where he talked for 40 minutes straight about vision, narrative, storytelling, market direction, everything except the one thing keeping us alive, the infrastructure I had been building piece by piece. He wrapped up with, "We'll finalize everything for the launch event next week. I'll send out roles separately." Roles. I waited for that email all day. Nothing. I finally wrote him a short message. Hey, should I prepare a technical walkthrough? I assume investors will want to see reliability numbers, failover logic, and capacity planning. He replied hours later, a single sentence. We're keeping the presentation high level. No need to overwhelm them with engineering. I stared at that message so long, the text blurred. Investors love detailed engineering when it proves you know what you're doing. We both knew that, but I let it go. Or tried to. 2 days later, I was finishing a wiring diagram when an unexpected email popped up from one of our biggest enterprise clients. The one that had agreed to test our new data center and potentially become our anchor customer. They wrote, "As discussed on the call with CEO, we understand you will no longer be the main technical liaison for our deployment. Please inform us who will handle architecture decisions moving forward." I reread it 3 times, as discussed on the call. What call? I hadn't been on any call. I hadn't even been invited. I messaged the CEO immediately. Why did the client say I'm not the technical liaison anymore? What's going on? He didn't answer. Instead, 15 minutes later, I got a calendar notification. Client architecture call, senior leadership only. He added the new project manager, 2 business analysts, and a consultant I'd never heard of. Not me. Something inside me shifted that day. Not anger, not panic. Just a cold, steady realization. Whatever this was, it wasn't an accident. This took coordination, decisions, intent. That night, I went through my inbox and found 3 chains I had previously been part of. Architectural approvals, deployment scheduling, SLA structuring, and in each one, my email had been removed. Cleanly, seamlessly, no trace. The next morning, I confronted him in person. He was in the office kitchen pouring himself tea, humming like someone without a care in the world. "Got a minute?" I asked him. He looked at me the way someone looks at a delivery driver who came too early, mildly annoyed by the inconvenience. "Sure, what's up?" he said. I kept it calm, professional. "You removed me from client communication," I said. "You removed me from the launch meeting. You're rewriting the deck. If there's a problem with my work, tell me directly." He exhaled like I was being dramatic. "You're overthinking. This stage requires clean messaging. Clients don't need to get lost in technical weeds. I built the weeds, I said quietly. You wouldn't have a launch without them. That landed. For half a second his face twitched. Not guilt, not embarrassment, but irritation. Look, he said, lowering his voice. Investors want to see leadership. A clear front. One face. Not 5 people fighting for attention. No one's fighting, I said. But erasing me isn't leadership. He set his tea down. Don't make this emotional. You're a contractor, not a co-founder. It's normal for contractors to stay behind the scenes. My brain barely processed the word. Contractor. I'm not a contractor, I said. You called me a partner. You promised equity. We agreed on a technical leadership role. He shrugged. Nothing was signed. He said it lightly, almost casually, but it hit like a punch. Nothing was signed. Meaning, I owe you nothing. Everything you built is now mine. I felt something deep and old tighten in my chest. The kind of betrayal that doesn't explode outward, but sinks inward and hardens. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, then send me the updated documents. I want to see exactly what my status is. He smiled with relief, like I'd finally become manageable again. Great. Legal will send you the contractor agreement. Just sign it and we'll move forward. The document arrived an hour later. It did not say contractor. It said independent external vendor, retroactively applied to the last 6 months. No equity, no ownership of anything I built, no rights to any part of the infrastructure I personally paid for, and a confidentiality clause strong enough to gag a military agency. I read it twice, then forwarded it back with a single line. I will not be signing this. 5 minutes later, he called me. His tone was different now, clipped, irritated. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. We just need clean paperwork before the launch. It's not personal. It is personal when you rewrite history, I answered, and remove me from my own project. It's for consistency, he snapped. The investors want a unified team structure. No, I said. You want a unified story, one where you built everything. Silence, a heavy telling silence. Then he said something that, to this day, still makes my jaw clench. Don't ruin this for us. Just be smart and sign. I hung up, not out of anger, out of clarity, because in that moment everything aligned. The deleted email threads, the rewritten deck, the client handoff, the sudden legal document. This wasn't miscommunication, it was a removal, a strategic one. And for the first time, I realized something else. I wasn't fighting for recognition. I was fighting to not be replaced. That night, sitting alone at my desk, studying the project folders, diagrams, and receipts I had so meticulously kept, a quiet thought formed. Steady, rational, undeniable. If they're willing to erase me now, what will they do once the launch goes public? I didn't know it yet, but that question was about to pull the entire situation apart. And soon, everyone, investors included, would see exactly what he'd tried to hide. The week before the launch felt like standing beside a machine I had built with my own hands, and watching strangers press buttons they didn't understand. Not because they were malicious, because they didn't know what they didn't know, and they thought confidence could replace a competence. After I refused to sign the retroactive contractor agreement, the CEO stopped talking to me directly. He delegated everything through the new technical coordinator, a guy named Evan, a pleasant enough project manager, but not an engineer. Evan had been at the company for 3 weeks. He had never set foot in a co-location facility. He didn't know the difference between IPv6 delegation and VLAN trunking. None of this was his fault. But he was suddenly owning my architecture. The CEO assembled a new engineering group, 1 junior sysadmin, 1 external consultant who billed by the hour, and asked questions that made it clear he had only read our documentation once, and a DevOps freelancer who lived in another time zone and often replied with, "Sorry, just saw this, can we review tomorrow?" They were good people, not stupid, not incompetent, just new. New to the system, new to the mess, new to the quiet, undocumented assumptions that every real infrastructure grows from, and especially new to the fact that I had been removed from every major decision. By Wednesday, messages started trickling into my inbox, not from the CEO, but from people on the ground who were confused. Hey, where can I find the updated hypervisor topology? Do you have the credentials for the monitoring dashboard? Which VLAN is reserved for client staging again? Simple questions. Standard questions. But they revealed the same thing. Nobody understood the system well enough to fix what was about to happen. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Legally, after refusing to sign their documents, I was exposed, if I continued contributing without a clear contract. And ethically, I wasn't going to play unpaid firefighter for people who had already cut me out. Still, a part of me hated watching the slow-motion collapse. Friday afternoon, I logged into the company Slack just to disconnect from a few unused channels, a small symbolic gesture. That's when I saw it, a new private channel created by the CEO. Yet your data center launch war room, dozens of messages, hundreds. I shouldn't have been able to see it at all, but a permissions bug had accidentally left me as a silent observer. At first, the chatter was optimistic. Someone wrote, "All servers online except Node 3. Great progress." Then 20 minutes later, "Node 3 boot loop again. Power cycling now." Then, "Hypervisor cluster not forming. Says licensing mismatch." Then, "Who has the final revision of the network diagram? The one we have doesn't match the cabling layout here." I felt my stomach twist, not from satisfaction, from dread. Because I knew exactly what they were running into. That licensing mismatch, I'd activated our licenses under my company account, the one I used for procurement. The CEO had insisted it'd be faster. It was. But transferring them required a support case opened from my login, plus identity verification. Without me, they couldn't even start the process. The network diagram mismatch. Of course it didn't match. They were using the outdated version from 2 months ago. The draft I abandoned after the facility changed our fiber routing plan. The final version, with the corrected trunk paths, was in a folder only I had access to. They had never asked for it. Around midnight, another message appeared. "We still don't have monitoring. Who created the Grafana org? Password not working." I closed my eyes. I remembered the day I set that up, 4 months ago. I had created it on my personal domain because the CEO hadn't bought the official one yet. I had offered to migrate it later. He had said, "Leave it for now, we'll sort it out after funding." Of course he forgot. I watched the unread messages balloon into chaos. Someone claiming the switch wasn't responding. Someone else realizing a firewall rule blocked internal replication traffic. Another trying to explain to the CEO that, no, turning it off and on won't fix a missing license handshake. The CEO posted every 10 minutes. "We need this working. Investors expect a live demo. No excuses, make it happen. Why is this taking so long?" At 2:06 a.m., the external consultant finally wrote something honest. "Without the original architect, we're blind. We don't have the credentials, configs, or documentation needed." The CEO didn't reply for almost an hour. Then he sent a private DM. To me. Short and sharp. "We need you at the facility at 10 a.m. Non-negotiable." I didn't answer. 10 minutes later. "Don't be difficult. Just come fix it." I muted the conversation. At 3:40 a.m., he finally snapped in the war room channel. "Who told the investors there might be delays?" That was not approved. Someone responded. "They noticed the systems aren't online. They asked directly. We couldn't lie." The CEO didn't speak again for the rest of the night. By morning, the situation was public inside the company. The launch was compromised. The infrastructure was half alive. And the CEO, the man who had insisted he alone built everything, had run out of people to blame quietly. At 9:15 a.m., my phone rang again. The CEO. I let it go to voicemail. Then the CFO called, then the project manager, then the consultant, then the CEO again. Finally, at 9:52 a.m., a number I didn't recognize called. It was one of the investors. His tone wasn't angry. It was calm in a way that felt more dangerous. "We're trying to understand the inconsistencies," he said. "We'd appreciate your perspective on the architecture and implementation. Could you join us at the facility?" Officially. There it was, the word that changed everything. Officially. I asked him one question. "Will the CEO be present?" "Yes," he said. "And so will our legal counsel." That told me everything I needed to know. I arrived at the facility 40 minutes later. Not as a firefighter, not as a savior, not as the guy cleaning up someone else's mess. I walked in as the one person in the building who knew the truth of how this system worked, and the truth of what had been done to erase me. And the moment I stepped inside, every conversation stopped. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. When I walked into the collocation facility, the air felt unnaturally still. That kind of tight, charged silence that fills a room when everyone inside knows something irreversible has already happened, even if they haven't said it out loud yet. The investors stood near the cold aisle, jackets still on, clipboards in hand. The legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman with a stack of printed notes, stood beside them. The CEO hovered a few steps away, pale, sweaty, trying to look composed and failing. What struck me most wasn't their faces. It was the screens. Half the dashboards were dark. The cluster view flickered in and out. Warnings blinked like a heartbeat on life support. I didn't touch anything. I didn't approach a single keyboard. I simply folded my arms and waited. One of the investors cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We'd like to understand a few things." He gestured toward a folding table. We sat. The CEO sat last. The counsel opened her folder, a dozen pages, every one of them familiar to me. Receipts, invoices, contract drafts, email chains, screenshots of the launch deck, my documentation logs. She began quietly. "These are purchases made using the architect's personal funds, many of which appear to be critical components of the current infrastructure." The CEO jumped in immediately, too quickly. "Those were temporary. We agreed he'd be reimbursed after the round. It was a verbal arrangement." "Verbal arrangements," she said evenly, "do not supersede ownership. Legally, the equipment belongs to the person whose name is on the transaction." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The investor continued. "We've reviewed the technical readiness. There are inconsistencies, missing access, mismatched licensing. It appears certain systems were never transferred to company ownership." He looked at me. "Is that accurate?" I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I chose precision, the one thing no one could twist. "Yes," I said. "Some licenses and accounts were provisioned under my business entity because procurement had to happen immediately. Transfer requires my verification, and documentation for several systems was never requested from me before I was removed from communication." The CEO leaned forward, voice trembling. "You weren't removed. We were reorganizing for clarity, and you refused to cooperate. You blocked access." I turned my head slowly and looked him in the eyes. "I didn't block anything. You removed me from client chains, from diagrams, from planning. You told a major customer I was no longer their liaison, and you sent me a retroactive contractor agreement that erased 6 months of my work." He swallowed hard. A visible, painful motion. The counsel placed another document on the table, a printout of that agreement. "This," she said, "is legally problematic. You cannot reclassify someone's prior work without their consent, nor can you claim ownership of intellectual property produced before such an agreement is signed." That's when the CEO snapped. "This is ridiculous. He's sabotaging us. He's holding our launch hostage." The investor raised a hand, just one, and the CEO fell silent like someone had pressed a mute button. "Let's be clear," the investor said. "No one here believes sabotage is taking place. What we see is inadequate documentation, inconsistent leadership, and an attempt to revise internal history in a way that now jeopardizes the entire facility." His tone sharpened. We invested based on a representation that you built this infrastructure. That appears to be inaccurate." The room held its breath. The CEO's face reddened. His foot tapped uncontrollably. He tried to speak again, but the investor continued. "We're restructuring ownership effective immediately. We will be assuming operational control of the project. You will step back from technical oversight until further notice." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a reprimand. It was a verdict. The CEO slumped in his chair, deflated. Then the investor turned back to me. "We'd like you to help us complete the launch, legally, formally, with proper compensation and rights. What do you need in order to move forward?" For the first time in weeks, I felt my pulse slow. Not from fear, but from clarity. I spoke carefully. "I need full reimbursement of all personal expenses at cost. A formal technical leadership contract. Control over documentation and access transition. And a guarantee that my work will be credited accurately moving forward. No theatrics. No revenge speech. Just structure." The counsel nodded as she wrote. "Reasonable," she said. The CEO looked at me then, not with anger, but with something quieter. The dawning realization that he had never understood the difference between silence and weakness. He tried one last time, voice barely above a whisper. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We could have handled this internally." I didn't bother answering. The investor did that for me. "This is internal," he said, "just not on your terms." We moved through the facility afterward. Investors, counsel, me. I pointed to the racks, the cabling, the hypervisor nodes, explained what needed to be fixed, what needed to be transferred, what needed to be rebuilt entirely because shortcuts had been taken after I was pushed out. Every step of the way, they listened. Not because I demanded it, because competence demands its own attention. By late afternoon, the launch plan was rewritten. The CEO was removed from technical communication. A formal reimbursement agreement was drafted. My new contract was sent for review, and access migrations were scheduled through my team. There was no dramatic shouting, no triumphant speeches, just the quiet, methodical reordering of a system returning to logic after drifting too long in ego. As I left the facility, one of the investors walked with me to the exit. "You were calm today," he said. "It wasn't personal," I replied. He smiled slightly. "That's why it worked." I stepped outside into the cold evening air, feeling a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in months. Not victory, not vindication, just equilibrium. A return to the simple truth that work done with integrity doesn't disappear just because someone tried to claim it. The next week, we launched the data center without fanfare. No cameras, no bragging, no theatrics, just clean metrics, stable uptime, and everything functioning exactly the way it was designed. My name wasn't missing anymore. It wasn't oversized either. It was where it belonged. As for the CEO, he wasn't fired, but his role shrank into something manageable, monitored, and supervised. The investors didn't enjoy public drama. They simply removed his ability to fabricate another narrative. And me? I finally understood something I should have learned earlier. You don't fight to be seen. You show your work and let the truth handle the rest. In the end, nothing magical happened. No twist of fate. No lucky break. Just accountability. Just consequences. Just the natural gravity of honesty pulling everything back into place. Some stories end with fireworks. Mine ended with silence. The good kind.